If you'd like to watch this episode, complete with the video clips, check out our YouTube channel and visit youtube.com/@MenAtTheMovies. While you're there, like and subscribe to us to get any content we release between episodes, like little appetizers to invite you into the main course. Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, we enter into the tragic story of Napoleon. In him, we see a man who is competent in the realm of battle and incompetent in the realm of love. What fails in the relationship with Josephine, and how can we find true attachment and keep the battle out of the bedroom? Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald and I'm super excited to be joined today by Morgan Snyder. Hey Morgan, how you doing today, buddy?
Paul, good to be back with you. Thanks for having me. I'm super stoked for this conversation.
Yeah, it's been a while. We did Company Men and Crash, and then just couldn't get our schedules to match up over the last couple of years. So, and we've been trying to get this conversation about Napoleon going, not Napoleon Dynamite. There's no vote for Pedro.
That would be great to do as the next one. That is so worthy of time.
A very different vibe. And
complete joy bomb. That's all it is. It's a total joy bomb. God loves to laugh and God loves to play. There you go.
Yeah. And there's a little laughter, not a lot of play in this movie. So, I mean, let's just kick off into this conversation because I think we can talk for as long as the movie goes, but we'll edit out all the extras. But what went through your mind and your heart when you saw this movie and your reaction was, oh, I got to talk about this with Paul. Like what, like the whole context of that situation, what was that for you?
Yeah, Paul, I immersed myself in it because I saw it in a theater, and I don't see films in theaters much. I'm cheap, and I'm an introvert, basically. But I happened to be in rural Wyoming. I was on an elk hunt of all things. My son has been my hunting partner since he was 2.5 years old. He's now 20, and he was on his gap initiation year. And so it was my first time in the field without him. By myself, and I was so sad. And it was just the late season meat hunt in terrible snowstorm, 13 degrees, and I was 2 miles back, and I was on this herd, and it was just a bad idea from the start. I had a knee injury. I shouldn't have been there. Hadn't ever packed an elk out myself. I always had, my partner, my friends, and I ended up in this herd of 200 wintering elk, all cows, and I had a cow tag. And I had it dialed in at 200 yards, and I was like, I don't know if I want to take a shot. I don't know. I'm looking for a small one. And then they caught my wind, and they got up, and they started moving. And there was this one huge cow right in the middle, and she just had her chest out and just looked up, just arrogant pomp and stance, immature confidence. And I put my crosshairs on her, and I said, all right, Jesus, I am going to breathe, and I'm going to pull this trigger if she doesn't take a step. And 200 elk start moving, and she just stayed and stayed and stayed. And so I smoked her and ended up packing her out myself. And I was spent, and I named her Napoleon because we name every animal that we shoot so we can live through the story. But the reason why is that night, it was an all-night pack out, I guess. So the next night after I rested, I went to the movies by myself. And I just felt like I was receiving love, and it was a fathering moment. And Napoleon had just came out. I love history, and we did Les Mis, and right that era of what was going on in France in the 1700s is fascinating. But to immerse myself in a story that felt like a mirror for my own life and so many of the remarkable men I walk with. Paul, like right there were the themes that seemed to cut at the core of masculinity, the dilemma, the desire, the destiny, the possibility, and in Napoleon's case, the failure to ever become the fullness of what God intended, and therefore so much harm to so many. And it's my passion to see men come alive and come restored and become fully God's intended person that he meant when he meant them. And so I came out of the theater and I just was so moved by the power and roles of gender, the realities of what we do with power and how it corrupts and what's at stake. And I just know that's your sweet spot. So yeah, I reached out right away and said, hold me to it. Let's do this movie. Don't let anyone take it.
Yeah. I mean, we could already break down even the story of the moose named Napoleon. Just that, like you said, that immature arrogance of,
Yes.
and you see that in Napoleon. Joaquin Phoenix has played this character, and throughout the movie, how he's so immature in these moments. And as I was sort of prepping and killing time until we actually got to have this, I was looking at the Wikipedia page, and it says that Scarpa had been approached to write this movie by Ridley Scott, and he did this research on him, and he told Ridley Scott what he wanted to do, and he said he envisioned Napoleon as being competent in the realm of battle and incompetent in the realm of love. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating language, competent in the realm of battle, incompetent in the realm of love. And that sort of naive arrogance. I think what I would invite us to be curious about is taking it a level deeper. What's below that? Because yes, we see a profoundly gifted man. He is competent in war. He is he's a craftsman. He's a Jedi Knight. He's been highly trained, and he's willing to take enormous risks, both personal and sadly on behalf of so many other voluntold, we call it, in elk packing. You're voluntold to carry out meat. So yes, gifted. But I think below the arrogance, what I'm curious about is why does it seem that he's mostly a boy? And what is it that he's really looking for? In other words, we can quickly summarize it as he's immature, but I think it's more honest and even more kind to say, what if he's only uninitiated? There's that fascinating scene where in the first battle, his horse takes a cannon.
Oh,
I mean, it's unbelievable. This cannonball goes into the front quarter. And then after the battle, he goes in hand-to-hand combat, and it's brutal. And he goes up to the horse, and in a violent scene, he extracts the cannonball that essentially saved his life. And he says, ship it to my mother. It's just really fascinating. And what I notice of 25 years of walking with men is I see a boy in a man's world longing for a mom. And so all of a sudden, when you see this really gifted, competent warrior that's so incompetent in love and causes so much damage, I find this shift from anger or judgment or disappointment to actually something like compassion and something like curiosity. What's he want from mom? What's he need? Where is he lacking? And how does that inform most everything else we find him doing with his power? So that's sort of where I took that. What do you think?
The line that you had used before, a failure to become. And we see in Napoleon in this character, and we're not going to talk about historical accuracy, inaccuracy, all this stuff. Just like Braveheart is a great story, it may not be anywhere near a true story, but
Totally.
and so, so we're talking about the character and the story that Ridley Scott told in this movie, but he doesn't change
Right.
through the decades. He doesn't transform. All the things we like to see, not just in the men around us, but in ourselves, of how am I growing? How am I becoming? And as you were talking about that search for mother, and that does come up a couple times, even in this scene. I think we're going to play with him and Josephine, which is really one of the most heart-wrenching scenes, where they're both in love with each other and angry and hurt by each other. And there's so many moments that I've experienced that with my wife.
Yes.
But when we talk about the search for mother, and we've been discussing this concept of attachment, of those 4 core needs of being seen, soothed, safe, and secure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that a man in Napoleon can be so confident that he's eager to get into the battle. He's like, I'm being left out. I've got to go get into the battle because I have to make sure it's done right. His arrogance is probably only exceeded by his competence.
Yes.
In that scenario. But a man who can do that, and we see those types of men around us, there's parts of us that have been those men. And then there's the same one who takes our hurt and our question of, am I a man? Am I valid? Am I worth anything? First to mother, and then many times to our wives.
Yes. Yeah, that language is borrowed from Dan Siegel's attachment theory of the longing to be seen and secure and safe and soothed. And what's so important to name is those longings are valid. Those are our DNA. We're made for God, right? We are intended to be strength through dependency. And so when we're a securely attached human, when we have strong and consistent emotional and spiritual bonds with a loving caregiver, there's something that gets settled. There's something resolved deep in the personhood. We come to know who we are because it's reflected back to us. We come to be the kind of person that's okay, that we have enough, that we're satisfied. And it's from that basis of robust well-being, pervasive wellness, that we can risk, that we can explore, that we can offer out of what I would name as overflow. Mm-hmm. But instead, what we see in him is this proficient lack. I mean, where I'd like to go is, what was Napoleon's story? What was his relationship like with mom and with dad? And I don't know that story, but it's like a crime scene. It doesn't take a lot to put the pieces together when you see the blood smeared all over the walls and a knife on the ground, that something violent happened here. And so it seems that his incredible God-given competency is taken to the world, but in the form of looking for love and validation. Mm-hmm. And he's a consumer. He's bringing that need to the world to say, tell me who I am. And so if I am successful in battle, then I'm okay, right? So using the battle to prove that he's a good man. And because of that, I mean, literally hundreds of thousands of lives are lost because of his choices, many of them very immature, because it was his longing for love and validation that was driving it. And so there's this quote where he says, I'm destined for greatness, and yet those in power only see me as their sword. And so you see the dysfunction that's not only in Napoleon, but it's in all of the structure of power. They see his competency and they know he can be used mightily because he is an uninitiated man that doesn't actually have those personal boundaries and that personal integrity. And so he is a sword. He's a sword for the army. And when that's useful for their power, their gain, then they use him. And when he's no longer useful, then he's dismissed and forgotten.
I felt there were a lot of similarities between his Napoleon character and the character he played in Gladiator, Commodus. Same broken man searching for validation. Yeah, and it was so good. And as you were talking, my heart, like you said, the compassion for Napoleon, even in the midst of him making terrible decisions, but you see him being used. You see the people who use him, and they're like, well, if I throw out the title of king, he'll do what I want. Or emperor. And even later in the movie, when Josephine's unable to get pregnant, his mother arranges for another woman to be in bed just to see whose fault it is. Is it Napoleon's fault or Josephine's fault why they can't have a child?
Yes.
You know, in some of the sex scenes in this, it was much less lovemaking and much more wanting to be child making. Like there was no real...
I would even say it was consuming. Much more coming as a consumer, and there was a violence. I didn't see any lovemaking in the film. I mean, it seemed every sex scene was very much one-sided. And it was what I, Napoleon, can get out of you, right? I'm using you.
Taking.
And I have a need. I have an insatiable need. And it is either a need for pleasure, right? A need for peace, a need for soothing, a need for an heir to the throne. But he comes as such a violent consumer. And what's so sad is Josephine allows it, because it's this fascinating picture, Paul, you know, this fundamental question: what does a man do with power? And it's such a fascinating question to begin with me. What do I do with power? And our self-evaluation can often be off. And it really is helpful to ask people, what am I like? Friends, coworkers, kids, you know, my kids did a bit of a skit about 6 months ago where they acted like me and my wife. And it was shocking. They were actually better at us than we are. And it was embarrassing because we sit here as kids, as parents going like, man, I don't know if we're communicating, if we're teaching what we want to teach. Oh, they know us so profoundly well. It's embarrassing. And so that idea of what do I do with power? But the other sort of complement to it that's so fascinating to me is, how does a woman control or manipulate to harness other people's power? And it's fascinating. There's so many films that you can see the theme, but like, I mean, there's this, you have to do My Big Fat Greek Wedding. You should do that with somebody. And you should do that with a guest woman. It's just so fantastic. But there is this brilliant scene where the woman getting married needs dad's buy-in, and they know dad. It's a caricature. It's a pose, right? It's they know exactly what they'll get. And so mom goes into dad and completely manipulates it so that dad feels like he came up with the solution, which they wanted, which is not what he would have done, and made him feel really good about it. And it's a really brilliant scene to show how sadly women are often required to manipulate the power of uninitiated men in order to see that some sort of truth and goodness or beauty comes, or they manipulate it in order to meet their own need for love and validation. And so all that to say, in the scene, it's fascinating where Josephine is incredibly brilliant at harnessing Napoleon's power and the system's power and the hierarchy of, and the opulence to get her needs met, even though she's actually an extraordinarily vulnerable person. I don't mean vulnerable in a positive sense. I mean, she's destitute, right? Her husband was killed in war, and she has children, and she has very little resources. And so she has to scheme and arrange and use her beauty in a sort of false vulnerability to get power to serve her. And so you see the brokenness played out in both genders in such a fascinating dance.
Yeah, and so there's two scenes that I really want to play, and I'm trying to figure out which one. I think we'll start with the first one, where Napoleon goes and he begins to court Josephine. And Josephine's sitting there taking off her makeup, and she's sitting there with her chambermaid, I guess, and just asking the chambermaid, should I kind of respond to his advances? And the chambermaid says, is he unwell? Is he bad? Is he unpleasant? She's like, no, he's all right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the next scene is she invites him. She sends him a card, apparently with perfume on it. And you see him, this general acting like a middle school boy,
yes.
smelling the perfume, wiping it on his shirt, rushing out, and then going back because he forgot his hat in his excitement.
Yes.
And the scene as they're sitting there in what appears, in this story is the moment they sort of locked souls and like they became entwined and in that dance for power. And so I'm going to play that clip. They're sitting here private in this room.
When you look at me, do you see an aristocrat?
No.
My husband had more than one lover. And when his head was cut off, all his mistresses watched. When I was in prison, I was told the only way to survive was to get pregnant. So, General. Do I need warn you of my indiscretions?
No, madame.
Does where I have been concern you?
No, madame.
If you look down, you'll see a surprise. And once you see it, you will always want it.
In the beginning, she's asking, what do you see when you see me?
Mm.
If her past will be a problem for him.
Yes.
And in his eagerness, in his need, his desperation, he's like, whatever, anything. I would do anything for you. And then she offers him what she's offered to many men, what she offers to him to survive. She even says it. I was told that I need to get pregnant if I want to survive.
Yes.
Having a man's child is what is needed to keep me alive. And it's interesting. I've been to Uganda several times, and there is that mindset in those areas of low poverty where women will have a man's child so that he will provide for her and them.
Mm.
But then what happens when, and then this happens out of marriage, and the guy goes with his wife. He has one wife in the country and one wife in the city, and depending on whether he's working or at home, depends on what family he's with.
Mm.
And you see that desperate need to survive. But you also see, oh, if this doesn't bother you, I know how to hook you.
Yes.
You will never be able to say no again.
Yeah, it's fascinating. She's very astute. And much like Napoleon, she's extraordinarily sophisticated and intelligent and profoundly wounded. And so in some ways, on one level, you see these two adults, and on the other level, they're just two children, just playing maybe like, childhood romance, right? You might say. And so what's fascinating is almost like a poker game where she goes in big at the beginning, and she's like, I'm not going to play this soft. I'm going all in because I know he's powerful and I know I'm powerful. And this is the way I'm going to play these cards. And what's fascinating is, to your point, Paul, he's so not interested in fidelity. He's not looking for love as much as he's looking to fill a need, to consume beauty. And she is incredibly attractive in that scene. I mean, I could feel the pull as a man, and I can feel the pull that says that's the prize for being a man. If I'm a man, I get the girl, and I get the sex, and I get the attention, and I get the nourishment if I'm really a man. And you feel that pull where she literally is, it's Proverbs 8, where she's just pulling him in to her clutches, not knowing that it's going to cost him his life. And so in both of them, you see the actual, how would I say it? It's almost like malnourished, right? They both are so needing
They're starving.
food.
Yeah,
they're starving. They're starving. They have everything and they have nothing, right? They're powerful people in the world, but in their souls, they're malnourished. They're starving, and they're using each other to try to fill something that actually neither of them can provide because they haven't become that.
Yeah, no character in this movie has an arc. They are static the whole
Right.
story.
It's really fascinating, isn't that? Like, for so many films, like we were talking about earlier, like we're drawn to redemption stories, right? I want to see victory. Like I can't handle, I watched a little bit of Yellowstone, and I just had to stop. It was
I felt the same way. People love this. And it's like, I've watched 2 or 3 episodes. I was like, I can't do it.
I can't do it. I'm in Yellowstone stories all the time. I want to see redemption, but everybody is operating not out of a place of longing for truth, goodness, and beauty. Like it's in them, but everyone's compromising and power broken. Yeah. So that doesn't have redemption. So it's interesting where it's just such a mirror to say, where in my life is God patiently waiting, but I'm moving too fast or my life is too loud that I'm simply not receptive to God. And it's like that parable of the sower and the seeds, where Jesus describes 4 different conditions within a soul of the soil, where it says the seed is generous. I mean, Napoleon has so many opportunities to come to a real honest place of vulnerability and be genuine about his lack and choose faithfulness and fidelity or repent from his egotism. And there's just no change. And so, you think of the hard packed soil where it doesn't matter how much seed comes, the birds come and eat it because it just can't penetrate. It's cynical. And then you think of the shallow soil where it's genuine and something starts, but then as soon as, the busyness of the world and the cares of this world just come, it quickly gets burned out. And then there's the crowded soil, right? Where there is good soil and also weeds. And in that soil, the weeds take up so many important nutrients, but don't produce a harvest. And so I just notice the soil that is Napoleon, so much of it is impenetrable. The violence against his soul must have been so pronounced. And nobody, what's fascinating in that story, is making efforts to really love him. There's no interactions where someone comes to the center and says, I care about you for your sake. I mean, he truly is the sword of the government. And that's where, the static nature is very sad.
Yeah, so Josephine, and she's played by Vanessa Kirby, who's, I really enjoy her roles, but she is coming with she needs to survive and will do anything to get it.
Absolutely.
He needs to be validated.
And she knows the game to play, right?
Yes. And he needs to be validated, and he'll do anything to get it. And it's battle in the bedroom.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, that's there's strategies, there's, flanking maneuvers, and, you can take that as far as you want to.
Exactly.
But it's all power, and when she slouches down and raises her skirt to him, she, while appears, is giving him something, but in that moment, she's taking the power.
That's so well observed, Paul. You're exactly right, because one of the greatest acts of feminine love towards a man is to offer vulnerability at the risk of being harmed. To open, I mean, literally, let's get anatomical. You open yourself to receive strength.
Mm-hmm.
And it's meant for both to have intense pleasure in the process. And so you're right. Even her body language, her lifting up her skirt, there's something where it's communicating the message of vulnerability. But in actuality, she is sending literally a soulful power over him that is a spell that lives, that exists. It's a soul tie until the very last breath, literally in his last words in his real true life.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And so they end up getting married, and it's interesting. They have these playful moments.
Right.
That you see when they're getting married. There's the scene when they're having breakfast or something. But again, there's these brief moments of merriment, as they'd say. That seems like the right term for this 1800s French thing is merriment. But he goes off to war, as that's his job, right? He's a general. He's got to go advance France against England, who is his sworn enemies. He'll do anything to make England look bad. Really, It's anything to make himself look good and prove himself on the field of battle. And there's a concept I want to come back to after this clip. It's this concept of, because Napoleon is so competent in battle, he takes that same approach in the bedroom. And so I don't want to talk about that concept yet, but I want to break this down on the backside of this next clip of, he goes to battle. He's written her letters. He's concerned about her faithfulness. Are there snakes in the bed? Are there men going where only it belongs to me? And we know she's not. We see it. And so Napoleon finds out. One of the other leaders, commanders in the army, tells him, because one of his lovers is the handmaid, the chambermaid. And so he's like, oh, she's having an affair. He leaves the army. Like, he deserts the army to go confront his wife. And, you see it on the paper that, Napoleon's off waging war and she's enjoying herself in bed with her lover. And so he comes back, he's locked her out of the house. She comes in, and this conversation goes on. It's 3 separate scenes back to back to back. And first she's sitting there tearful. He's yelling at her. In the next moment, they're sitting by a fire. And in the final piece that you're going to hear, they're sitting together, calmly talking. And this is like, we talk about these moments that are painful in the movies, that wrench your heart. We prefer the moments that make our hearts come alive, but we also need to pay attention to the ones that really make us feel compassion, I guess is the word that we've used. And so just listen, or if you're on YouTube, you can watch the clip, and then we'll discuss what we see and our response to that after this plays.
What kind of creature are you? How could you care so little for me and my feelings? You are a selfish little pig. You think so lowly of me.
No, I don't.
Then why? Because you're what? Say it.
Sorry.
That's not enough.
What do you want me to say?
I want you to say that I am the most important thing in the world.
You are.
Say it!
You're the most important thing in my life, in the world.
And without me, you are nothing.
I'm nothing.
And you will do anything.
I'll do anything.
I'm not built like other men. And I'm not subject to petty insecurity. You're a beast. I feel sorry for you.
You want to be great? You are nothing without me. Say it. Say it. You are just a brute that is nothing without me.
I'm just a brute. It is nothing without you.
Yes, you are nothing without me or your mother. Did you have affairs?
Of course I did.
Did you love them?
No. No, I did not.
Were they pretty?
Yes. Some of them. They served their purpose.
More than I do.
They cried less. That made them more attractive.
Don't leave me, please. Don't leave me. Just don't leave me. You don't have to forgive me. Just promise me you won't leave me.
So both of us have emotions in our eyes at that scene. For me, I'm recalling all the times, my wife and I have been married for almost 15 years now. And the man she's married to today is not the man she married. Thank God, because there is transformation and redemption in our stories.
Yes.
And I never said those words. I want you to say that I am the most important thing in the world. Oh, but I abused her heart because I demanded that. Prove that I'm more important than work or friends it's an insatiable hunger within of tell me I am most important. And when we were talking earlier about the whole idea of attachment, that's where it comes from. That's where it starts, is from mother, of that feeling of you are the world to me. But when we look to that for other places other than God, we find that brokenness and that what becomes an all-consuming need. And you said the hunger It's like,
Yes.
I need to be the most important thing in your world. Because if I'm not, I'm nothing.
Yes. Yeah, there's so much. Even what you said, Paul, what I want to reflect back is how much is rooted in identity. If you say I'm the most important thing, then I am someone worthy of love and belonging, right? And then she takes that power play and says, you're nothing without me.
Right.
And so he has to become nothing so that she can feel powerful. And if it works, then he feels powerful because she stays. And you see this power over, power under. And like you said, the emotion that rises for me is for so long what I didn't understand. And I'm going to do a visual. If our listeners, I'll explain it for our video, is in our marriage, it was one up or one down. So I would have conversations with Sherry like this. How fun is that when your husband's talking to you like this? So I would get big, or I'd be down here looking up, right? And we would have this power brokering where one of us would get big or get small. And for me, the dynamic I did not understand was I would do this servant-hearted thing. I'll put you first. I'll do what you need. At my own expense, trying to act like a good man, but it was coming out of a place that was invalidated, feeling like if you think I'm a good man, then I am a good man. And then it would blow up because I would be exhausted or angry. And then I would get big, and Sherry would tell stories. She'd say that I would move her and the children around the house with my eyes. And it's fascinating how many times I've heard in spouse references for men that I create an atmosphere where they can trust that those references will be given to their husbands in love. How often they say men overestimate or underestimate the power that they bring to control the atmosphere in the home, for better and for worse. And a lot of times it's worse. And so often there's a above and below, over, power under. And healthy relationship is eye to eye. And that's why it's really important with children to get down low and look them in the eye, because we have no idea how intimidating, even if we don't feel intimidating, even if we're not using language at all that we would call yelling, sometimes just the energy of a person over you. My kids will say I was yelling at them. And I used to laugh going, you haven't heard yelling. I'm not a yeller, I know yellers. And that was totally invalidating the point. The point is their experience, right? Feelings are facts. Their experience was, you are yelling at me because it was power over. And so, yeah, what this scene helps each of us consider is, where are we brokering power in relationship, trying to get small or get big? And what is our natural inclination when we feel fear or shame? Do we go to getting big or getting small? And what would it look like to be honest in a self-assessment of the impact? When I get big, this is what happens. When I get small, this is what happens. Or even ask those that love us or live with us, what is it like? Do you feel like I get big or get small? I bet you could get a pretty clear answer. And what is it like to live with me? And how could I change that relational style in a loving way that models a repentance to say, I want to choose to be eye to eye, to know and be known, to first seek to listen and to understand. The goal is not to be right. The goal is to understand. And that's what you do out of a whole heart.
Yeah. And my wife says I have the crazy eyes. That's my get big. I've even used that phrase of, I feel little today, of feeling small, insecure, in some of those shame-filled spaces. I'd say needy. Yeah. I remember the night of the election, my wife was very upset by the results, and she was tearful. And my response in the moment was unhelpful because I wanted to offer her hope. Well, our hope's not in the government. Our hope is in God. He's in control.
Yes.
It's all these things. I wanted to fix her. I wanted her to feel better.
Yes.
And it got to the point where she said, oh, well, I guess we just shouldn't talk politics anymore. If I feel this way, I just won't share it with you. And she says she wasn't saying that to hurt me.
Yes.
But we've known each other long enough. I was like, okay, this conversation's going nowhere. I'm going to go take a shower.
Yes.
Again, because of our past, my fear, like what you said, I don't want my wife to walk on eggshells around me. I want her to feel safe. I want her to feel protected. I am not the threat. And for many years, I was. There was a moment in counseling early in our marriage where she's on one end of the couch and I'm on the other, and she's sitting there crying, and the therapist says, don't you see the impact you're having on your wife? Because I would say, well, what she said hurt me, so I can say something hurtful back. Because it's a battle, right? It's warfare. Because if I'm competent here, I'm using those same strategies to try to win and try to gain power. And so fast forward to that night of the election, and I'm in the shower thinking and praying. It's like, oh, what do I do? And I realized, and I came out and I was like, I need to apologize because I did not handle your heart well. Because you just wanted me to listen. You wanted me to comfort you. You wanted to be heard. Like, that's it. She wanted me to see her and hear her.
Right. And to be understood.
Yes. I don't need to fix it. I don't need to be uncomfortable. I don't need to, all the things that we want to do, right? As action-oriented men. To realize, one of the most helpful things for me to realize in those moments, in the power plays, when it feels like power and strategy and battle,
yes,
is I don't need to defend myself.
Yes.
I don't need to prove myself. I don't need to, if she misunderstands or whatever, like, I don't need to defend that what you said. I don't need to be right. As long as we have a relationship. I remember you were talking on a podcast with Sherry, and you guys had shared about a counseling session, and you had said, if she just does these 3 or 4 things, then everything will be okay.
Right. I've whittled it down. Do these 3 things.
Yeah, that's it. It's not that much. And the therapist looked at Sherry and says, and you don't need to do any of it.
I was so pissed. And she was absolutely right.
Yes.
Right? What, because I was making the argument of, I don't want 100 things. I just want 3. Any reasonable person can do it. And the arrogance, what I was putting is all of that pressure of 100 things into those 3 things, as though you are responsible for my well-being. Right. And it was still a very sophisticated version of operating as a consumer, demanding, fill in the blank, that I'm right, that my needs are met, rather than coming to her as a man who is rooted in God, who is well off, and is here to bring strength in the service of love. Yes, I'm open in vulnerability to receive care, but that is a blessing, and it's not my right, and it's not a requirement. And that's a huge shift. And I think your point, Paul, what I appreciate, back to the film, with the story with your wife, she wanted to be understood, right? The longing was, would you know me in this place? And I would use the language, it's the miracle of validation. It's the miracle to be seen in a space and to be validated that what you're feeling is true to your experience. And in the film, Josephine is longing to be seen, Do you know what it's like to be that destitute and then be covenanted to a violent man who's a boy and then be tossed aside and given all the money she would ever need to live on? Her physical needs were met, but she's literally cast off by society and the man that was covenanted to her, and no one can see her. And then you have Napoleon that is so gifted that people are just using him. It's prostitution. And no one is coming to the center to validate how he has this insatiable desire to be nourished and nurtured and validated and soothed, that can be met, that's intended to be met by God, but no one will come to the boy. And so you have two people that are totally invalidated and nobody's coming to their center, and therefore they're forced to live in a constant power brokerage to the very end of their lives.
Because what does she say? Her last line is, "You don't have to forgive me, but just don't leave me."
Oh, and isn't it amazing? All up to that point, it's power over. She's very astute. She's very sophisticated. She's a lot like Proverbs 8 and 9, when you see the demonic just manipulating power and taking advantage of. And in that moment, my experience of it is, it's actually a moment of vulnerability where she is playing her cards, and she comes to the point where she's played her best hand, and she knows at the end of the day, if he dismisses her, she's done. At the end of the day, he holds the trump card. And that was a violence in our own marriage where I had this patriarchal view that I am the Lord of the house. I am over her, but I'm benevolent, because that was the gospel that I first came into Christ, is the men are the authority and the women are in good hands or not. And if they are, then it's good news. And Sherry confessed in a counseling session, she said, "I feel like a bird trapped in a cage." And this is like years into what I thought was a really good marriage. And so first I was like, who's she talking to? This isn't me. And I'm a pretty self-aware human being. And so I'm confessing. We don't see clearly. We see things not as they are. We see them as we are.
Yeah.
And so she said, "Morgan, you don't play the trump card often, but it's in your pocket. And as long as I know you can, I don't have control. And it makes me small." And I never thought about that, because when you're the guy with the trump card in your pocket, and that's the theology that you came under, well, as I turned back to scriptures and I really entered into the life of Christ with that, I thought of it very deeply, and I realized it felt very unbiblical to me in the fruit, in the life of this woman that I'm covenanted to. And so I relinquished the trump card, and we developed a new system, because it says, if I'm to love my wife as Christ loves the church, it actually doesn't matter in the scriptures what it says she's supposed to do, because that's the trump card. I'm supposed to love her as Christ loves me.
Yeah.
I am screwed. Like, there's no out, right? And so I handed her the trump card and said, this is one of the greatest risks I've ever taken, actually. I haven't thought about this for years, but I said, I had a secret false piece of having that in my pocket. And so many men use that, like Napoleon did, out of woundedness. And instead, we developed a system of green light, yellow light, red light from our mentors, Tim and Ann Evans. And it's really powerful, because either of us at any time can call a red light on a decision or an activity for the family. And if either of us is red, that means we stop. And we need 2 green, yellow lights to go forward. And so nobody has the trump card, and it requires our sincere coming to the center of each other's experience, our sincere willing to understand, and the risk that will be understood, and the confidence that God will help us walk through, because he's the greatest advocate for our union. And so I think it's a really powerful example in the film. At the end of the day, power trumps love, right? And he ultimately chooses power over love. What does he do at the end? He leaves her, and he says, in the interest of the nation, you should be understanding of this? Well, it's not for the nation. It's for his little boy heart looking for love. And he's willing to give up a wife if he can get a mother. And what he got as a warrior was that fulfillment of a mom, which was even deeper than a lover.
So I want to sort of use this as our last clip to wrap up. Because as you said, they divorce. He leaves her because she can't give him what people tell him he needs. His mother tells him that you need an heir, you need a son. And she can't give it to you, so she's of no more use.
Right.
So then it goes into, he goes to Russia, he goes to Moscow, he takes the battle there. This is what would lead to his exile in Elba. But they're in this winter, they're in Russia, and they're outside Moscow. And he wakes up to this noise and this light, and the whole city is burning. So I want to play his reaction and use that to sort of put a bow on our conversation.
Who did this? They did. No, they did not. Be sensible. Who set these fires?
Your Majesty, they did.
He'd rather burn his own city than negotiate with me. I didn't think he had the courage. Well, we'll go to St. Petersburg and have him burn that too.
We have let too much time slip away. We would be marching into the Russian winter with horses that are not raised for this weather. If we go back to Poland, we can wait out the winter months.
And on YouTube, if you're watching that clip, as the wise counselor is telling him, we are too far from home. It's too cold. We're not prepared for a Russian winter. Napoleon has his hat pulled over his eyes, soundlessly screaming until it actually makes a sound at the end. That little boy comes out because he's told no.
Absolutely.
And his arrogance leads to the death of so many, hundreds of thousands of men over the course of his career. But I wanted to touch on this line. They would rather burn their city than negotiate with me. I didn't think they had the courage. And you could have burned your marriage because you had the courage to hold your trump card. Right? That's how
Yep.
men like Napoleon look at it. Dude,
absolutely.
You lost your balls. You gave it up.
Totally.
You didn't have the courage. You're like, no, if I had done that, if I had held on to that trump card, I would burn down my city.
Absolutely.
Because he burned his marriage in his desire for validation.
Yeah. Paul, each of us can make a sophisticated justification for our sin, for our brokenness, for our generational damage that's been passed, that we have inherited, and I think I would close with this idea, or the question, what age am I? The part that is reacting this way in this situation. What age am I? In that scene with Napoleon, he's screaming into his hat. Any observer would say he's somewhere between 10 and maybe 15 or 16, right? He's a very young teenager. He's a grown boy that's not getting his way. And so he's very angry. And that's really important because I think it's actually true. We are parts, right? And Dallas says the whole movement of the work of Christ inside a person is that all the parts of them would be organized around God and sustained by God. And so I find myself often asking the question, how old am I? And often a part will come up. Oh, I'm 15 years old. And that's why I feel uncomfortable with my son's teenage friends that are really big football players, because there's a 15-year-old scrawny little punk in me that was never really loved or welcomed or celebrated. And that's the signpost. That's the trailhead to invite Christ to come to that young part. And so, yeah, my encouragement to men listening and women as they courageously dive into the space is, when you're in conflict, with compassion to yourself and to that person you're in conflict with, just to tune in and notice, what age does this person feel like they are? And where in their story might have they first felt that age where they got stuck? And it's an amazing trailhead to lead to a life that is truly life.
So Morgan, thank you for your time. Thank you for reaching out and using this movie and celebrating and Napoleon the elk with Napoleon the movie.
It's so good.
It, as frequently happens, the listeners don't get to hear the best part, and that is the 20 or 30 minutes before we actually hit the record button, where we just get to talk and catch up. And you miss out on that stuff. So, but just thank you for your time. Thank you for your presence and just sharing some of your story with us here today.
Yeah, I love what you're doing, Paul. And I love that you are creating a way for men and women to become curious, using these modern day parables to access their own hearts. And most importantly, I've walked with you over years, and I've seen the man that you have become. And I've seen your commitment to use these films and to use other circumstances in your life to become the kind of wholehearted man that God finds joy in entrusting more and more of his kingdom. So it's my joy and it's my privilege. I like doing this with you. So let's keep going.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And so if you're like, man, Morgan sounds like a pretty cool dude, check out his website. He's becomegoodsoil.com. He's got the book, Becoming a King. So if you haven't read that, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, we've referenced content from either Becoming a King or Become Good Soil hundreds of times. So I would just encourage you to check out the website, check out his podcast. It's made my life richer. And I'm thankful and blessed to call you friend.
It's mutual. Thanks, buddy.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Morgan Snyder talking about Napoleon. We hope that you don't burn your lives down, but you can be curious when you enter into conflict about what's going on. And we hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?